Giving people feedback is part and parcel of being a supervisor. So, in my first job, in my first management position, my least favorite moment, the one that I will be glad never to have to revisit again, was when I had to tell a young man that I managed that he had to wear deodorant to the office, please and thank you. Now, giving feedback is obviously not always this awkward, but it can be challenging and uncomfortable. So, if you're struggling to give feedback about people's performance or work, whether that's to your direct reports, colleagues, or maybe your students, today I'm going to offer you 3 useful strategies, actually 2 frameworks and a technique, that will make it feel much less awkward. Hi, I'm Dr. Leena Akhtar, and I've thought about this question a lot, starting from when I was a manager to when I was teaching undergraduate students, particularly the ones from less resource backgrounds, to what I do now, which is facilitate and coach organizations and leaders across sectors in how to enact deep culture change. And a vital part of this is feedback, how it's given, how much, and what kind. When I was in high school, I went to the American school in Bahrain. I was doing the International Baccalaureate Diploma, and one of our requirements was to do an extended essay research project. Now, for whatever reason, I was 16, I chose a very heavy topic: war crimes in the Pacific Theater during World War II. Nobody on the school staff could advise me on that project, so eventually I got paired up with the French teacher's husband. He was an ex-Marine and had trained as a historian. Now, I was a good student in high school, got A's on basically all of my writing assignments. All the spaghetti I threw at the wall tended to stick. So let me tell you, when my drafts came back from this man, dripping double their weight with ink, I was a little affronted. But the process of really taking in his feedback and integrating it into my future drafts, and most importantly, learning not to personalize it, that made me a critical thinker, a historian, and a writer. So, first point is that feedback is absolutely critical. We need to be able to tell people that they need to do things differently. But mind what I just said, do things differently. The framework I'm about to offer you is one that I learned in my training with an organization called Visions. Their approach is deeply rooted in a liberatory social psychology framework called transactional analysis, and that's where this thing I'm about to share with you is from. So this is about differentiating between different types of feedback, specifically feedback about what somebody does versus feedback about who they are. Now, to illustrate this, I was conducting a training with a tech company during the pandemic on behalf of Visions, and there was a German engineer who I still remember fondly because he showed up to every single one of our sessions, even repeating the material. And when I was making the distinction that I just gave you about feedback about who I am versus what I do, he was like, wait. So you're telling me that I should say to somebody that you should structure your reports differently rather than you are a terrible engineer. I was like, yeah, give that a try, see how it lands. So in this framework, which I'm not going to unpack at length, pieces of feedback, they're also called units of recognition. And I want to differentiate between feedback about who somebody is versus what they do. So who somebody is. Remember, I just said the word recognition. So even something like a hi, it's nice to see you. I'm glad we're on this project together. I miss you. You uplifted the whole team. Feedback about what somebody does can sound like your color schemes made our materials look really, really good. Listen, I've stolen the way that you explain things because it's so clear and people love it and respond to it really well. Or, hey, that white paper you just wrote landed us this new client. So the takeaway here is to be intentional about what kind of feedback that you're giving, and know that it can even be things like acknowledgement or a hi or just making eye contact, right? That counts as feedback. I'm going to tell you why this is important next. So the second thing I want to offer is to think about not just the moment of feedback, the moment I have to say something critical or where I have to tell somebody what they need to do differently. Think rather about the feedback economy in a group or especially a relationship. So we're taking the pressure off of this one moment where I have to deliver something that makes me uncomfortable, right? So the question here is, what is the whole picture of feedback that's been given in this relationship? Going back to what we were just saying, right? Feedback, recognition. You might be familiar with the Gottman Institute's research. You might have seen it in the news, where the researchers could predict whether a couple would stay together or split up based on the ratio of positive to negative statements in a given recorded interaction. Now, I'm probably boulderdizing this and I'm borrowing the concept, not replicating it here. So, in my coaching and organizational work and in my relationships, I'm paying close attention to what the feedback economy is like. Right? Are we in a parched economy where no news is good news, but if somebody messes up, they'll hear about it? Or are there lots of opportunities to give positive recognition along with feedback about whatever needs to be changed? So, just to illustrate this, I saw something on LinkedIn recently. It was about, slightly apocryphal story, and also I think the lesson holds, right? It was about a person who worked at a large multinational corporation, one of the big ones, right, that everybody's heard of, and was 2 weeks away from retirement. They called him Bob. And when a new leader came in, he asked this team who in their workplace made things run better, who they looked up to, and so on. People kept mentioning Bob. And when Bob heard this, he broke down and cried because apparently this was the first time in the decades he'd been working there that he'd ever once heard that kind of feedback and recognition that he was so valued by his colleagues, right? So, is there plenty of positive regard? You can think of it as deposits if you've ever heard the term emotional bank accounts. So this is related to Stephen Covey's concept, but I'm using it slightly differently, right? So are there plenty of deposits in the positive emotional bank account? So the reason I want to invite you to be intentional about how you give feedback and about giving plenty of positive feedback is that feedback about what somebody should do differently doesn't happen in a vacuum. Good feedback can actually make it so that hard feedback lands differently. So in that half year that I was working with that ex-Marine on my extended essay, if he hadn't also told me where my strengths were and communicate that he really saw them, I probably would have had a hard time taking in his suggestions. So what I want to offer you is to ensure that anybody who you're supervising, anybody who you work with in general, right, there will be moments that you need to give them feedback about what they could or should do differently. And the takeaway is to ensure that your positive feedback is also there and that it's frequent, intentional, and sincere. The last point I want to offer you is more of a technique and also one that I learned from Visions. And really, this is the easiest one to implement. It is substituting the word and for but. Now, this is one that many of you may have heard of, and maybe you use it already. I found this to be particularly helpful when I was giving feedback across hierarchical difference. So the use case that sticks out most prominently in my mind is speaking to students. I frequently worked with students who didn't have as many resources put into their schooling as some of their peers. Maybe they hadn't been taught certain things, or maybe they hadn't had much energy or attention put into supporting them, right? As I mentioned, the feedback I got on my writing from the ex-Marine was absolutely transformative for me. So I knew the power of focused attention and how a little bit of mentorship can go a long way. And I actually often thought of the ex-Marine when I was working with my students. Giving feedback to somebody who's really self-conscious about their abilities and is receiving a lot of messages about how maybe their abilities are not up to snuff with their peers can be hard. So, substituting and for but. I want you to listen to the following two statements. So your ideas in this paper are strong, but it would have been stronger if you had structured it differently and included X, Y, and Z author. Versus, your ideas in this paper are strong, and moving that final section up earlier and citing these three authors would have made it an A. How does the first statement sound versus the second? Personally, when I hear a but statement, I hear what comes after the but much more loudly than whatever comes before it, if I retain what comes before it at all. The thing is, both sides of the sentence are true, and using and actually lets both sides of the sentence land rather than introducing unnecessary contrast. Your presentation is fantastic, and that color scheme is very hard to read. Can we up the contrast before it goes to the client? This is not just for serious work applications. I love you. I need you to please pick up your socks. Normally I'm a hugger, and today I have a migraine, and I need you to check in before you touch me. Being able to give feedback is absolutely vital for working relationships, for school, and also for relationships in general. My brilliant colleague, Dr. Deborah Walker, likes to say that the but actually stands for behold the underlying truth. So, after this, go out, try substituting the word and for but, and see how it feels. Bonus tip, I'm told that this apparently works especially well with teenagers and toddlers. Now, going back to the story I told you at the beginning, decades after I submitted that extended essay as I was getting my PhD, I actually tracked down and wrote to that ex-Marine. And I said to him that I was about to get my third history degree and that it was his feedback and the time that he put into me that taught me how to write and think. And in honor of him, I would give my thesis students handwritten feedback on their next to last draft. And I thanked him for the gift that he gave me by working with me. If this has been useful and you want to learn more frameworks for building relational cultures, I would love to have you here, so please consider subscribing. I'm also on LinkedIn and Substack, and you'll find my links in the channel profile. Thank you so much.